Hi, this is Dan Heisman. We're continuing with our series of videos to help you improve your chess game. Today I thought we'd look at defensive problems, or another way to think of it is defensive tactics. A tactic is a forcing sequence that wins material or checkmates, but a lot of times you're on the other side of that. Your opponent is threatening to do something, and you need to use the same kind of tactical motifs to try to save yourself. Or maybe you don't even need a motif, but you need to figure out what his tactic's going to be and throw a monkey wrench into it. So defensive tactics can sometimes be harder than offensive tactics, and I find that my lower rated students have a lot of problems with defensive tactics because they're so used to reading a book where it's white to play and win, that when they have a problem where they have to be white to play and not lose, they're not as accustomed to doing that. And a lot of times when you're doing a defensive problem, you have to be able to see things from the other side of the board. You have to be able to say, well, if I do this, what can he do to me? And you have to be able to play the offense sort of upside down. And good players are equally adept at looking at things from either side of the board, but lower rated players have more trouble looking at things from their opponent's side of the board. You don't have to walk around the board every time you want to see what your opponent's doing. You want to be able to see it from your side of the board. Okay, so in each problem in today's video, I'll give you the problem and I'll tell you who's to move, and you have to figure out what the opponent's threatening and what you want to do about it. So what you can do is pause the video as long as you want, see if you come up with the answer. I'll just pause for a couple seconds and I'll assume that that'll give you time to pause as long as you want. And then I'll go into the explanation of the defense. Okay, so in the first problem, it's white to play. White to play. All right, well, you have to figure out what black's threatening. And what's black's threatening is the famous Philidor's legacy. If it was black's move, and let's make it black's move instead of white's move, black would play queen b6 check. White could lose a piece by throwing a bishop in the way, but of course that loses the game. He could play king f1, but then checkmate. Queen f2 is checkmate. He could play king h1, but then black will play knight g1 check, king g1, knight to h3 double check. If king f1, queen f2 is mate. If king h1, then we have the famous Philidor's legacy, queen g1 check, rook takes g1, and knight f2 with a smothered mate. So that's the threat. So how should white stop it? Well, suppose you picked h3 to stop it. Oh, let's go back and make it white's move. That would be nice. All right, so let's say you played h3. The problem with playing h3 is after queen checks, you can't play king h2 anyway. And after king h1, it's true he doesn't have Philidor's legacy anymore. You can play king h2, but you're losing the exchange for nothing. And that's not enough to save the game. So h3 doesn't work. Suppose white tries something like rook to d2. Well, then still check. And if king here, black has all kinds of nice things he can do. Let's let the computer find the best one. Computer says, don't even check here. Don't even play knight h2 or knight e3. Just play queen e3, threatening knight takes h2 checkmate. And there's basically no defense. Rook e2, knight h2 check, king e1, queen takes g3 check, king d1, rook a d8 check. You get the idea. All right, so rook d2 doesn't work either. How about rook f1? Rook f1, same problem. Queen checks, king h1, knight checks, and if king g1, we've got Philidor's legacy again. So he has to take and lose the exchange, and that's enough to win the game. So none of those defenses work. The only defense that works is the quiet move on the side of the board, which simply guards the square b6. You play queen to a5. And as you can see, Stockfish now says that black is slightly better, but black has no tactic and white has saved the game. Sometimes it's very hard to miss these little quiet moves that stop the threat. I found when I gave this puzzle to my students, and I didn't give it to a lot of students, but when I gave it to a few students, they had trouble seeing that queen a5 was the best move. It just kind of looks off to the side and it's hard to see. All right, let's do the next problem. Take the analysis off the board. All right, next one in my list is number 122. These are from my ICC library. Let's bring it up. Examine percent 122. Defensive problem. Okay, this is white to play. So again, you can pause it if you'd like to try to figure it out. White to play. Okay, well, black is pinning white's queen to his king, and otherwise white is up a pawn. How does white save himself? And the answer is he plays bishop b3 check. So this makes use of a bunch of tactics. First of all, the rook can just take the bishop, but the rook on g3, believe it or not, is pinned to the queen on g4. So if rook takes b3, then queen takes g4. So now black has to get out of check. Well, if he puts the rook in the way, I can just take it, and if queen takes e6, queen takes g3, and white's clearly winning. So black has to move the king. But if he moves the king to h8, then white plays rook h5 check. This is a deflection sacrifice. Again, these are all defensive sacrifices. We're trying to save our queen. And if black plays queen takes h5, what else could he do? Then queen takes g3 saves the day. That leaves only one line, which is king to f8. And now white can play rook f5 check. And again, queen takes f5, removes the guard on the rook, deflects the queen away, and white plays queen takes g3. Suppose black doesn't want to do that and he wants to play king to e7. All right, let Stockfish find the most correct order here. Stockfish says rook f7 check, king d8, rook a8 check, and already we can see black's in super big trouble here. He has to put the queen in the way. I can take the queen with check and then take the rook, and this game is toast. So the answer to the problem is bishop to b3 check, followed by the appropriate rook check. All right, let's do the next problem. It is number 130. All right, this is an endgame problem. Black's got a problem. His bishop is trapped in the corner. And if he just takes that knight, white will take the bishop and then you get a queen. So what can black do? Again, you can pause the video and we'll see what we can do. Well, the answer is black should play king d7. Now, clearly, if white just moves the knight away, black can move the bishop and keep guarding the square. So at some point, white would have to take this bishop. And now what should black do? Well, black has to be very careful here. What he wants to do is keep the king trapped in the corner forever. But if he goes to the wrong square, it won't work. So if he plays king c7, white will simply play knight d6. And now black cannot go king to c8 and keep the king in the corner. And no matter what black does here, on the next move, white's going to move the king out of the corner and then get a queen. So what black should do after king d7, king takes, is play the king to a white square. And now that's the same color as the knight. The knight can only change colors every time it moves, and black will also change colors. So if white now plays knight d6 check, black will play to this square. Now, white would love to cover this c8 square on the next move, but he's on a black square, which means he has to move to a white square. And if he moves to a white square, he can't guard a white square. So for instance, if he starts to move away and black just starts moving back and forth, you can't lose a tempo and guard the square that he's going to go to. There's no way to do that because both sides are flipping colors here. And once they do it and it doesn't work, no amount of knight maneuvering is going to change the colors. So here, again, black's going to a light square. Now, white would love to guard a dark square, but he's going to move to a dark square, and if he moves to a dark square, he can't guard it. Knight here, king here, knight here, king here, knight here, king here, and it's a draw. So the answer to the puzzle is Play king d7. King takes. This is a parity problem. You have to go to the right parity. You can't go to a black square because then he'll go to a black square and guard that white square. You have to go to the white square. And you get your draw. Good defense. All right, let's do the next one. It is number 136. I think this comes from a Schliemann variation of a Roy Lopez. All right, this is a typical tactic. White is up a piece and it's black's move. What should black do? So again, you can pause the video, figure out the defense. Okay, well, clearly taking your piece back right away with pawn takes, bishop takes, check, and let's say the king moves and you take the rook. If he plays bishop h3, you can always play queen e2 because you're up enough material. Queen takes, bishop takes, king takes, and white's up a piece in the endgame. So, and playing bishop here right away doesn't work. The bishop's guarding it. He'll just save the knight, keep guarding the rook with the bishop. So that doesn't work. Playing bishop d7 doesn't work. White will simply play knight to d4 and guard the bishop. And again, if black plays something like c6, bishop e2 keeps guarding the rook, and black doesn't have enough compensation for his missing piece. Okay, so the right answer is play a6 first. Now if white plays any discovery with the knight, you can just take the bishop. So let's say white tries to play bishop a4 with the idea that, okay, if he plays b5, I'll play bishop b3 and I'm up a piece. But here black can now win the piece back. Now he can pin the knight to the bishop. Why does it work bishop d7 work here and it didn't work before? It's because the bishop is now on a square where the knight can't guard it. It's 2 squares diagonal to the knight. So no matter what white does here, black's going to win back the piece. And this happens in more than one opening, more than one position. It's a very good thing to know. When you get to these kind of positions, whether you're down a piece and you need to win it back or you want to win a piece, the right way to do it is a6, bishop a4, bishop d7. These are part of the patterns that good players know from studying lots of tactic books. That lower-rated players, if they haven't studied enough tactics, they have to figure this out. Well, I look at this and I say, oh yeah, I've seen this a million times. Is this one of those ones where you just play a6 and bishop d7? And you always analyze it and check to see if it is. And of course it is, so that's the right answer. So the defense for black here to get his piece back, a6, bishop a4, bishop d7. Okay, let's get to the next one. The next one is number 142. Okay, in this puzzle, white has just played queen to d2, threatening the knight on h6. So what should black do? All right, so again, you can pause the video. Well, this looks like on the surface it's a tough one. If you move the pawn up and he takes the bishop and you take and he takes back and you try to trap the queen, sometimes that works. Here that really doesn't do a lot. White could certainly just play h4 here and break up the king side. So trapping the queen isn't going to work. If you try to move the king out of the way so the knight can go back, thank you very much for the knight. Knight to f5, well, you are up a pawn. And if you play knight f5 and he plays pawn takes and pawn takes, now black has 2 pawns for the piece, but white can take the pawn on c5. He can go for a kingside attack. This doesn't work. So what can black do here? Well, it's a little bit of an optical illusion, but what black should play is g5. Now white's down a pawn, and he can win a pawn. He can play bishop takes c5, or he can play bishop takes g5 and get his pawn back. But either way, black's going to save his knight. Obviously, if he plays bishop takes c5, the knight is safe. Suppose he plays bishop g5. What good did this stupid g5 do for black? And the answer is, oh, he can play queen to b6. Oh, look at that. A second piece is now guarding the knight, and black has saved the game. Does black have a wonderful position? No, but he's not down a piece, and that's the whole idea of these defensive tactics, is to save things. So it's very easy to miss that. Why is it so easy to miss that? Because the queen is on d8. He has to go to the left, and he has to clear the 6th rank in order to guard the knight. Well, that's all hard stuff to see. It's not the typical kind of maneuver you look at. And the more things are difficult to see, the more it is easy to miss those things. Even if you're a relatively decent player, you could probably be someone rated 2,000 watching this video, and you might have missed that. You know, even if you took a few minutes to try to figure out, you might miss the fact that g5 followed by queen b6 will save the knight. Don't feel bad. We all make mistakes. Okay, so let's go to the next one, number 143. Okay, black has his bishop pinned to his king, and it's attacked by a pawn. So black needs a defensive move that'll save himself. What can he do? Okay, you can pause if you need to. Well, conventional moves won't work here. If black just moves out of the pin with the king to d7, white will just take the bishop. If black plays, what else could he even try? You know, if he tries to get a bunch of pawns and play d5, you know, if worse comes to worse, white can play pawn tags. Let's say he tries to undouble his pawns, gives him a check. And in fact, he doesn't even, let's see, does he have to give him a check? Yes, he does, because if rook takes c7, king to d8, hits the rook and hits the bishop. I probably don't want to allow that. But black has some pawns here. He shouldn't resign, but he's in big trouble here. So the answer is, surprisingly, black should castle queenside and hit the rook with the king. And now if white plays bishop a6, then bishop takes b7 will win for black. If white takes the bishop, of course, black's going to take the rook. If white takes the bishop with the bishop, then black can take with the pawn. And, you know, white's okay here. He's going to play rook takes a7 or something, but black's got extra pawns. So, castle queenside. Now, you might say, how would I know that black can still castle queenside? When you're given a puzzle in a book, the convention is, if it looks like you can castle, then you're allowed to castle unless retrograde analysis proves that you must have moved the rook or the king earlier in the game. On the other hand, if it looks like you can play en passant, then you cannot play en passant unless you can prove that the pawn move must have been the last move. That's the international problem conventions. So here we're using that convention that black can castle unless you can prove that he earlier moved the king or the rook, and you can't do that in this position. So therefore, castling queenside is legal. All right, we got a couple more. Number 204. Defensive problem. Okay, black is in check, and he has to figure out the best way to get out of check. All right, so again, stop the video. See what you can do. All right, well, clearly, if black does kind of nothing, you know, if he plays king f8 or something, white's going to take off the knight and win the knight. So black doesn't want to lose the knight, and it looks like the right way to do that is to play c6 and let the queen guard the knight. The problem with c6 is there's 3 pieces attacking c6, and there's only 2 guarding it. So black gets into a lot of trouble. Let's let Stockfish show you. All right, Mr. Stockfish, what would you play here? Stockfish says, I'm going to play b4 hitting the knight and removing the guard on this pawn. When he saves the knight, I'm going to take the pawn. If he hits my queen now, I'll play queen to c2. If he plays bishop g4, I'll just castle, and white's ahead by 4 pawns. So even though that saves the knight, it gives white a completely winning position. The right idea here, believe it or not, even though white is still okay, is to play bishop to d7. This is an easy move to miss. I think when I was going over this game with my student, I was very surprised that this was the best defense. And the computer says, of course, now he can't take the knight because you play b6 and you trap the queen. So that's what I missed. I missed the fact that he could do that. Now, Does that mean that white has a bad game? No, white still has won this pawn on d5, and after he plays queen c2, he remains up a pawn with a very good position. But this position for black is by far the best defense, where he doesn't lose nearly as much. The computer says if after he castles, he's down by about a pawn. If he plays anything else, the second best move, let's take a look here. Best move, he's down by about a pawn. Second best move, he's down by 4 pawns. So that's a big difference. So obviously you need to find the move where you're still in the game. Even though white has a good position, you're not losing the knight, and you're saving it in a good way. All right, we have one last problem. Number 231. Guess it would help if I stopped the computer and gave myself a place to type. Okay, defensive problem. All right, black has a strong kingside attack, and white needs to figure out a way to get his king not checkmated. All right, so this is the hardest problem, I think, in the group. And, you know, I don't think I would get it right, so don't feel bad if you don't get it right. But if you want to give it a try, hit that pause, and we'll show you what the computer says. Okay, so first let's see what happens if white ignores the attack. So let's say let's show the analysis from Stockfish here. Let's say white plays knight takes c7 and says, what attack? Then black's going to play knight g4, threatening like queen f2 check followed by rook h6 checkmate. If the bishop takes the knight, the queen takes, threatening mate. King tries to run away, queen takes check, king e2, queen takes check, king d1, queen takes check, disaster. Okay, so clearly, well, we can look one more line. Knight takes, knight g4. Suppose he doesn't take here. Can he do anything else? Can he guard this square? No, because if he plays rook e2, we have a famous pattern. Queen h2 check, king f1, checkmate. Queen h1 checkmate. So he pretty much has to take that knight. All right, so that's going to be a killer idea in a lot of lines that you might try here. So what else could white do? Well, it turns out white's okay if he sees the following crazy line. King to f1, knight to g4, and now I would be tempted to take that knight, but it still doesn't work. Bishop takes, queen takes, and what does white do here? Let's say he plays rook bc1, the computer's best move. Stockfish says, I won't even play queen takes g2 check. I'm a computer. I'll play knight f6, queen takes c7, rook c8, hit the queen, queen b7, knight takes e4. And it says now white has nothing better than to sacrifice his queen due to the coming attack on the king. Okay, so king f1, knight g4, and now the best move is king to e2. Wow. Allowing black to play queen takes f2 check, and then you play king d3, and now black plays knight h2 to break down the pieces, and you can see that, well, now Stockfish says 0, 0, 0, so maybe knight h2 wasn't the best move. Still says 0, 0, 0. Let's go back a move. 0, 0, 0. So see, white is defending. Queen f2 check, king d3, knight h2, rook e2, queen g3, bishop e1 hitting the queen, queen g5, he's in full retreat. Now we'll play knight takes c7, thank you very much. 0, 0, 0. If he tries to pin the knight, then knight e6 hits his queen and actually wins. So we can't do that. It says knight takes f3, g takes f3, queen h5, rook f2 guarding the pawn, knight f6, and it's all 0, 0, 0. So that's it. The only defense is to let him take on f2 with check. King f1, knight g4, king e2, queen takes f2 check, king d3, and white is okay. Every other line seems to lose. Now, if you're a good player and you looked at that long enough, you probably would find it by process of elimination, just based on the fact that all the other lines are so bad that eventually you'd say, well, what about this line? And then eventually you'd say, okay, this is what I call a critical variation. You know, if you are analyzing these lines, if you're white here, and you're trying other moves than this maneuver of running your king up to d3, they're all going to fail pretty badly. And assuming you have enough time on your clock and you're a good player, you're gonna say, well, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. And you'll keep eliminating things until you finally say, well, what about letting him take on f2 with check? Maybe I can run up to d3. And then finally, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, at least I can breathe a little bit there. Maybe that works. All right, fine, everything else loses. Let's try that. So today we've been talking about defensive problems, or we might call them defensive tactics. In any case, you're defending against tactics. So the better you can play on both sides of the board, in other words, the offensive side and the defensive side, the better player you are. What we see from a lot of players is they read so many white to play and win books that they have a lot of trouble doing the kind of stuff we saw in today's video. But you have to be equally good. You can't just be a good offensive player and be a terrible defensive player and end up being a good player because you can find all these wonderful combinations. You have to stop your opponent from doing nice things against you too. So you have to do these things equally well. You have to apply the skills that you learn to win material, to apply them to when you're on the other side to make sure your opponent is minimizing how much he's getting. And today was just a small example of defensive problems. And there are books with defensive problems. My book, Back to Basics Tactics, has a chapter on defensive problems. I think Susan Polgar's book, Chess for Champions or something, or Tactics for Champions, has a defensive chapter. Jeff Coakley's wonderful book, Winning Chess Exercises for Kids, which is not really for kids. It's probably the best intermediate tactics book I've ever seen, has one problem on each page. There's 9 problems on each page, but one of them is a defensive problem. And there's 100 sets of 9, so he has 100 defensive problems in the book. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. This is number 99. From the next video, we're going to have a little contest. I'll give away a free lesson or two. I haven't decided if it's going to be 1 or 2, but I'll give away a free lesson or 2 for a lucky subscriber, and we'll find a way of having people like email me and I'll pull it out of a hat. Last time I did that, some of them went into my spam folder and I missed them. So that won't happen again. This time when I have the contest, before I do the drawing, I'll be checking my spam folder and make sure that no emails went there. So, and I appreciate everybody who both goes into the contest and all those people who humored me when I made that mistake last time on the last contest. Okay, for my channel, if you liked it, give me a like. If you like the channel, you can subscribe. We'll see you next time. Bye.